what I find in regulated industries, which is where I spent a lot of my career, is that they're regulated because they're central and essential to our lives. There are so many commonalities between financial services and healthcare in that we have to be careful how we do things. We want to be able to innovate, but you have to be very careful because a mistake sometimes has big consequences. But that doesn't mean that we should move slow and not innovate.
Welcome to How I Grew This, where we dive into the world of digital marketing and connect with leaders in the space about how they're scaling, evolving, and growing. Hey, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of How I Grew This. This is Amanda, joined by my co-host, Adam. Hey,
Hi,
Adam.
everyone. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, and we have our wonderful guest, Patrick Wissonga, on the podcast today. Hey, Patrick, how you doing?
Good. Hey, everybody. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Hope you're listening on a Friday, everyone. So I'm really excited to have Patrick here today. We go way back. It's been years since we've connected. But, I've seen your career progression a little bit from the outside and really been fascinated by the type of work that you've gotten to be involved in over the years. So why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about, where you are and kind of what led you there?
So, as you said, I'm Patrick Wissonga. I've been in product and tech for about 20 years almost. Whew, wow.
Wow.
How the time flies. And I think I've known Amanda for at least half of that.
Like 10 of them. I know. It truly, it's amazing. I love that.
Nuts. Yeah, and I'm currently senior director of product at a large mental health company, but I've been all over the gamut in product. I started in my product career as a regular old product manager, but that's progressed into larger roles. I've led product as an entire integrated function with design, also engineering, with data in prior roles. Been in small to mid-sized companies as well as really large-scaled companies, and probably every model you can think of, B2C, B2B, B2B2C, you name it.
Well, I feel like that's rare that someone's gotten to see all of those different models and sides of the business. I guess from your perspective, what is the difference between all of those? Are there more differences or more similarities when you really think about it?
That's a hard question because I think it like in B2B to C, sometimes it depends on who the B is, what segment of B you're serving, right? If you're serving like a sole proprietor, for instance, as the B, they might be closer to the C than, say, an enterprise B2B to C. So it really depends on the constituent on either side. But I would say it's probably, in my experience, about 50-50 in terms of like the emotional needs, or actually very similar in terms of the emotional needs. The functional needs sometimes start to differ a little bit.
Okay, I want to unpack that more a little later, but it seems like the common thread obviously is product and product innovation. Can you tell me what drew you to that?
I started my career in the consumer banking industry. The U.S., I will say, has some of the most arcane processes and experiences in the world when it comes to how we manage people's money. I really found myself drawn to those customer-centric solutions, an environment where actually the main focus was usually the needs of the company. I started out on the software engineering side, and so that's how I got my pivot. People were talking about design thinking. That was the hot phrase, but at every company, but it actually wasn't really being applied in practice. And, I kind of dedicated myself with some mentors and support from my manager at the time into like starting to understand that independently and then finding that right pivot into product. And so I became one of the first product managers for what was new at the time at that bank, mobile check deposit. And that got my entry into product. And I started in mobile, which was like the hottest new thing.
Yeah,
So
great time to get into
right?
it.
Well, I don't
You
know.
never
I mean,
know.
my bank still has problems depositing mobile checks, so it doesn't seem that old.
Well, it's because it's applying technology layers to what is essentially a very analog process, right? You think about taking a picture of a piece of paper and money appearing in your account versus many other ways to move money.
Right,
It's fascinating, right?
What year was that when you were doing mobile
That
check
was
deposit?
2012. I started my product career in 2012. Previously, I'd been on the software engineering side. I kind of never looked back. I really am thankful for my boss and mentors at the time who really encouraged me to get that pivot. And I got that pivot within the company that I had started with after college. So it was kind of that perfect segue, leveraging knowing the complexities of how banking worked on the back end, but really going to the front towards the customer and the end consumer.
So you mentioned banking, we know now mental health. Like, talk to me about the different industries that you've gotten to be a part of and, how moving across them has shaped your approach.
What I find in regulated industries, which is where I spent a lot of my career, is that they're regulated because they're central and essential to our lives. There are so many commonalities between financial services and healthcare in that we have to be careful how we do things. We want to be able to innovate, but you have to be very careful because a mistake sometimes has big consequences. But that doesn't mean that we should move slow and not innovate. And when we look at like the rest of the world, when it comes to financial services, for instance, you look at Asia, what like the payment innovation that they've been able to do. We know that we can do it. And I think oftentimes the barriers to innovation in those regulated industries are really more kind of embedded cultural barriers in those industries and psychological barriers than there are like really technological barriers, if that makes sense. And sometimes regulatory barriers as well.
Okay, yes. No, that's definitely tracking. So what's I guess the secret to making sure that you can move fast without, sacrificing some of the regulatory requirements and making sure that you're doing things above board? Is there an approach, like anything that you've made part of your process to make sure data is set up in a certain way, or talk to me about it?
I think in a regulated industry, you really have to dive into the legal and compliance kind of constraints and understand them. I think a lot of people treat legal and compliance, whether it's the people or the legislation, as the enemy, and that won't get you ahead. You really have to kind of understand them, and they exist for a reason, especially in a regulated industry. It's not an industry where you can just move fast and break things all the time, right? Sometimes when you break things, people's mortgage payment doesn't post, right? Or when you break things, a huge indicator of someone's health could be missed, right? So the regulation is there for a reason, and I think understanding it and figuring out how to work within it to the extent possible and push the bounds in a safe way, leveraging that understanding is really key.
So it's kind of like rather than leaning on the letter of the regulation, you lean into the spirit of the regulation.
I think in many cases, yes. I think it's a difficult dance, but yeah, I think often the spirit of the regulation is the full essence of it. And they're depending on the regulator. Sometimes regulators are willing to work with innovators in the space if they're approached ahead of time versus somebody coming in and just totally trying to flip the table and do whatever they want.
Ask for forgiveness doesn't work.
It does at times, depending on the regulated industry. I think we saw that with Uber and how they were able to expand in a very regulated rideshare industry. I think the stakes are different in that industry, though. Did it work for Airbnb in New York? No, right? As we can see based on the headlines. But yeah, sometimes it depends on the industry and the nature of the regulation in terms of asking forgiveness, I think.
For sure. But I agree. I mean, people are afraid of things they don't understand. And really, ultimately, these are just in place to protect people's personal health, like financial data. And honestly, there are great ways still to be able to execute really great user experiences and get insights in a way that is in compliance. So I think, to your point, it is really just about, embedding it into your process and not shying away from it or thinking it's some big, dark, scary thing that you just have to avoid with the 10-foot pole. So like that, for sure. I guess another thread that I'm seeing across your career is, being at a blend between some of these early stage kind of startups and then kind of bigger enterprises. So you've probably done the 0 to 1 as well as the scaling in a more mature environment. I'd love to hear any insight you have about some of those experiences.
Yeah, I think in 0 to 1, first of all, it's exhilarating, right? But you really got to be about that life. And I think a lot of people think that they are, and they aren't, right? So, I mean, you really have to be able to thrive in ambiguity. You have to be able to be curious. You have to wear a lot of hats. If you really need systems and processes to be handed to you on day one, I would say it's probably not for you. Oftentimes, it's your job to build those processes and systems through the ambiguity. Um, you have to be able to do a lot with a little. And I think in 0 to 1, you're actually able to, because there are less natural barriers. Um, I would say in 0 to 1, some folks think it's sexy, but realize very quickly that in fact, they actually do value the structure and stability. I've seen it in many smaller companies where I've been, where folks come in from an enterprise scaled company and realize very quickly, nope, this isn't actually what I wanted.
I'm
um,
wearing too many hats. There's no
yeah,
more room on my head.
I think one of my favorite examples is I was at a company that was really scaling, and there was a person who joined, I think, a communications or training team from a larger company, and they were in a director level role, and then they were asked to edit video, and they were like, "Well, no, like we hired people for that. Like, you want me to edit video, right?"
Man,
What do
yeah.
you prefer if you'd have to choose one? Do you like the small or like the large?
I've gone back and forth. I think that I appreciate the aspects of both. I think very large enterprise is probably not my favorite, but that, scaling like Series D, Series E, and 0 to 1 kind of both really have their merits. I think in a later stage, you don't have to worry about resources as much, but it also requires a lot more patience, wider collaboration. Usually the guardrails are either there already or they're being formed. And you really have to learn how to partner, as I alluded to earlier, with kind of those control and compliance functions, because they exist for a reason. It's a different set of soft skills, I think, that you have to employ. And I think you just have to employ more soft skills as a company scales, if that makes sense.
You're doing mission-driven work now. What keeps you motivated here, having that deeper why connected to the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I think part of what keeps me motivated, working in healthcare tech now, is like the work literally saves lives. Like, and once you can overcome those natural obstacles that, that, as we talked about in a regulated industry, there are people on the other side of that obstacle that are really benefiting like every single day, and getting to see testimonials. It's so fulfilling.
Yeah, actual clinical outcomes. It's so funny because I think, being in this industry for a long while, oftentimes when someone's overwhelmed at work, it's like, okay, well, we're not saving lives. It's okay. And then you're in that position where, no, wait, actually, I am. And that's actually very motivating and very exciting, for sure. So
Does it make it harder to find your next role because you have to find both the company that has the mission that you want, as well as the role that it's right for you?
That's such a good question. I think mission-driven work exists in so many forms. It doesn't always have to be literally saving lives. I think, there are social media companies, for instance, whose mission is to connect the world, right? And we've seen, obviously it's a subject of big debate, but, social media has enabled the world, people to connect to each other in a ways that they never could before, right? It means you don't have to go to the class reunion. You can keep up with everybody from childhood in ways that you never did, right? That's a mission, right? And it's a mission that in many ways has been realized. So I think that it doesn't necessarily have to be saving lives. I think that there are many missions that can really resound with people, if that makes sense.
Definitely. So, I mean, find a way to work on what you're passionate about and feel connected to the outcomes in whatever way that is.
Exactly.
Any other advice to those wanting to do meaningful work?
Yeah, I think, principles and ethics should definitely be kind of your guiding light, and give any organization kind of what I call a sniff test to see if meaningful impact is actually their goal, or if it's just a part of their marketing strategy. Because there are a lot of organizations that'll say that they're a mission-driven organization and they care about the world, and then you look at the actual practices under the hood, and that's actually not the case. So it's really important to sniff that out. And, I think, as I alluded to earlier, really starting with what you're personally passionate about, even if it's not the industry you're passionate about, it could also be about the methodologies, about the technology. That is what can kind of keep you fueled through the really difficult times, especially at the startup phase. But also, I would say don't be so dogmatic that you ignore the business portion. I mean, at the end of the day, in for-profit enterprise,
it's a business.
You need money to power your mission, right? But it doesn't mean money at all costs, right?
Definitely. You could have the greatest idea of saving the world, but it's not going to get anywhere if you can't keep the lights on.
Exactly.
You talked about methodologies, and I mean, obviously, we are in the presence of someone with a ton of product experience under your belt. So I really want to dig into some of your, product expertise and approach around, the product development lifecycle and everything. So can you kind of talk us through your development approach in product generally?
Yeah, I really am an evangelist and an advocate for hypothesis-driven product development, right? Ideally, you start with a challenge or an opportunity. And then, if you form a hypothesis on how you can address the challenge, fix the challenge, or capitalize on that opportunity, right? Hypothesis is, if we did X, we could change Y materially. And then, doing validation on that hypothesis. It's qualitative, quantitative, concept testing, really building true conviction that it's worth proceeding. And, I think it's interesting because how you go about it could vary. It depends on if you're, are you building a business or are you optimizing a business, right? So are you making a bet on a whole new product or service line, or are you doing an A/B test on a button color, right? So the level of rigor and the approach vary widely, and the questions that you're answering also vary widely, if that makes sense.
Maybe you can tell us an example of a product decision that you made that you're particularly proud of and kind of what led to that.
Sure. So, once upon a time, I was in charge of building a brand new mobile app from the ground up. And it was really to serve one main purpose. And this is in the digital identity space. It was a known brand, had a core business already that trying to expand via mobile. And we really had two options for an MVP. We knew we needed to build an app. And, one was to just build a purpose-built, single-purpose app, release that core flow, and make it kind of throwaway after it was done. Or build a great experience for that, and some lightweight features that support the core business. Because again, this is kind of an existing brand. Some would consider a lifestyle brand. What was interesting is there was a lot of pushback from some of the senior leadership of the new business about being distracted and really focusing on only this core thing. And myself and the head of design theorized that, hey, if we don't serve the latent needs of the customers of the core business, who, by the way, are paying the bills, we actually could piss them off and then get terrible app reviews. And if there's one thing that senior executives hate, it's bad app store reviews.
Bad review.
Right? So, we got data a few ways to kind of validate our hypothesis. We looked at customer service questions and the reasons that people called into customer service. And the biggest one was, are you at XYZ location? How can I take advantage of your service at XYZ location? And then we said, let's deploy a survey to a subset of customers. We did a Survey Monkey, and guess what the top need that emerged was? Knowing the locations for existing customers where services, where they could take advantage of our service. And so we decided to go the route of building kind of a more full service app. And we got an investment from the CEO. It was actually almost $1 million. So, it was to hire an agency.
Bad.
Right?
Yeah, for an app, that's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And we built, obviously I'm biased, but what I would call a first-class mobile app that took care of the needs of this brand new kind of business line and the existing customers. And as soon as the app hit the App Store, we weren't even promoting the new business line. Within hours, it was downloaded thousands of times with zero promotion of it, right? Guess what 95% of those users were doing when they downloaded the app?
checking
searching
their
for location.
location.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you had built that into the app pretty readily available as well.
We did.
Yeah.
We did. Readily available, and our hypothesis was validated by the data. So we were vindicated and validated.
So, Patrick, to read that back to you, because it sounds like you can't share the name of the company.
Yeah, ideally no.
Okay.
No, but I met with you while you were there, and I'm
Yep.
loving that I might
Yeah,
have
that's right. That's right. I became a customer branch at this company.
Yeah, you did.
So there's a company out there that was building an app, and basically they said, should we just throw something in the app store that's quick and easy, and you were saying, no, we need to have a full service app that like has legitimate purpose. Otherwise, we're wasting our time.
That reflects the needs of all the customers of this brand, because there's an existing business that had and still has, I don't know if it's millions, at least hundreds of thousands of users that pay every month for it, right?
And what was going to be the alternative if it wasn't this location service, which is what people actually wanted? The executives wanted it to just be kind of a lightweight throwaway app.
Some of them wanted to be a lightweight, throwaway, purpose-driven, kind of single use for
like
a particular use case.
All you do is sign up.
Yeah. For a new use case. And it was, both were plausible, but like we really wanted to make sure that we represented the brand well. So that there isn't a knee jerk after you release an app that like is single purpose and people download it expecting that it serves all of their needs. And then they're like, app doesn't do anything. And then, you know,
you remember
board
that, like
members, others see it. And then
the dawn of the app store, right? So like there's a bunch of people, we have to have an app, throw it out there. It's total garbage. And then it disappears. This app you built probably still around and still used by tons of people.
Absolutely still is.
That's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah. And I think it's a challenge for some people in their roles to really have almost the courage and the data to be able to say, hey, even though this is coming from the top down, I'm going to challenge it. And I really think that we should move in this other direction. So it's nice to hear a story of that and really kind of feeling the tangible outcomes that all of you listeners have encountered in your daily lives at some point. knowing where
yeah, I always tell my product managers, like, the data that you have is a lot of the power and leverage that you have. If you go into a meeting with a senior executive saying, I think it should be this way, and the senior executive says, no, I think it should be this way, who usually is going to win, right? Like the HIPPO effect, the larger a company gets, the more the HIPPO effect takes hold. And if you haven't heard of the HIPPO effect, it's the highest paid person's opinion. It's the highest paid person's opinion is what it stands for, right?
Yeah,
I love that.
Good.
And so if you go in with data and say, oh, well, my position is backed by this, guess who has done the research and guess who hasn't? You can almost guarantee that the senior executive has not done the research. And rationally, they will 9 times out of 10 go with your approach if you can back it up with data.
Yeah. You talked about some of the surveys that you ran. What are your other approaches that you and, your product managers that you steer use to get good data?
Oftentimes you can leverage first-party data. You can leverage clickstream. You can leverage back-end data to answer a whole lot of behavioral questions about what people are already doing without even having to survey or interview people. I think, they both bring kind of advantages and challenges, and that's why I think a balanced approach is important. That first-party data shows behavior, but it often shows behavior without context, so it can give signal. And then often interviews and surveys can be a little bit biased, even with the best survey methodology around. Often the people who are responding to those are on the fringes, people who are power users or people who really are pissed off.
Yeah, exactly. It's the only time I review is if I really love it, which is rare, or more often if I hate it. I want everyone to know how much I hate it.
Exactly. The 3s or the 5s, depending on what scale we're looking at, are rarely included.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm also kind of curious, what do you look for in product managers? now, and I guess maybe there's some difference in, depending on what industry you're in or what stage the company is in, but are there some true core competencies or qualities or values that you look for in those that you bring on?
I think there are some that always kind of shine through as true key qualities, regardless of size of company or industry. I think one of the biggest ones is curiosity. I think that you really need to be able to turn over a lot of rocks and proactively and seek to understand not just your space, but also the broader world and adjacent spaces, and ask a lot of questions without being told to ask those questions. And so I think another is the ability to connect the dots. So being curious and then being the ability to connect the dots between different spaces that you've seen, where you can develop pattern recognition, where you've seen something in a different industry or studied that and say, this is kind of similar to that, right? I think another is the ability to work with data. That doesn't mean you have to be an expert in data. You don't need to be a data scientist, but you need to be able to use data to, as I talked about earlier in hypothesis-driven product development, to form your hypotheses, to back up your hypotheses, and then to measure success. And that needs to be an orientation, regardless of industry that you have, so that you don't just become a feature factory, where it's like check the box, release features, and then not be able to actually claim any true wins from that. I think another is some level of technical acumen. I think that this is where a lot of product managers, a lot of product folks run away. Be able to understand and speak the language of your software engineers, your data folks, your data engineers, and be able to push back and ask questions when they say something is not possible, right? I think it builds a lot of respect when you can speak that language versus throwing something over the fence and like, can we do this? You know what I mean?
No. Okay.
The answer is rarely binary, but you have to be able to kind of have that acumen. I say you need to be able to go to kind of like the systems architecture level. I don't think you need to be in GitHub reviewing code, but like you really need to be able to have that fully articulated conversation. So when I have a PM that comes back to me and says, well, my PM or my engineering manager says that like doing SSO for this would take too long. And I'm like, well, what is too long and why? And if you haven't asked that question, that's a problem, right? It's does that make sense?
It totally does. And there's like that element of curiosity in everything from, hey, I'm looking at the world, here's this challenge or opportunity, or at my customer base, here's this challenge or opportunity, all the way to being able to have enough context and technical acumen to say, to keep that curiosity when someone pushes back on something and be able to say, well, what do we actually need to do to get SSO done? Like, is it that it's going to take a year because we don't have the right resources on it? Or is it because, X, Y, or Z? So that is a really nice thread.
Patrick, you have a background in engineering, right?
Which helps.
I do. Industrial and systems engineering, which definitely helps. So I have not written code in a very long time, but I can understand a lot of the constructs. And so it does help speak the language. But, I think I had to dive into OAuth a few times to really understand how OAuth works before going into those conversations for potential partnerships, right? And so there's so many ways to understand technical concepts without being a technical expert or an engineer, I think, if somebody has the adequate curiosity.
I agree.
Yeah. And speaking about, being in a leadership role, how do you inspire your teams to stay curious, to overcome resourcing challenges or regulatory challenges or data challenges or whatever it may be?
I think to start, I really always encourage folks, like in challenging situations, to remember the mission, who we are building for, and why we are building. I think there are times when during tough discussions, people might say, well, I don't want to do that. And we have to remind people that we're here not to satisfy ourselves, but to build for an end user, a community, an industry, to really make a difference. And I think that like setting that and resetting that regularly, I think definitely helps. I think also in challenging times, sometimes part of the challenge is that people are focusing on too many things, so they're focusing on nothing. So if they are focusing on too many things, so really encouraging laser focus and helping them unfocus on things that are not as important, but their brain is kind of tricking them to tell them is important. I think from a curiosity perspective, it's really encouraging people to take that time to disconnect and to go to that conference, to read up on that thing. I think creating space for creativity within the workplace is also super important. So finding that time for hackathons or a design jam or a design challenge is easier to carve out than people think.
Wow, I really love that advice. It's so true. And having just come off of a conference, I'm like, yeah, I was energized and I am now. So love that for sure. And yes, if everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. So that's good advice as well. Adam, any other things you want to dig into Patrick with?
Just going back to the engineering question. So you kind of answered this, but I'm going to get you to be a little bit more specific. So you have an engineering background, you can code. How important is that to be a good technical product manager? Or can you just satisfy that with your curiosity, with being able to like sit down and figure it out?
I think that's a tough question because it depends on the person. You know, some folks can consume technical information easier than others. You know, it's easier for me because I have that engineering background. I think that, you know, one way if those concepts just really, really daunt you. And so like, for instance, a lot of people get into product via marketing, right? And often some marketers are technical, some are not, but often people get into marketing that are more on the creative side. I've worked with PMs to send them to a course at like a General Assembly or other places where they could understand kind of the foundation, the technical foundations of things, and understand cloud infrastructure and understand event-based systems. I have encouraged it and then made sure that we sponsored their ability to get that foundation is also another method.
So if you have the willingness, you can make it work.
Yes, exactly.
If you were to give a piece of advice to someone saying, "Hey, I want to get into product management," what would you say? Like in an elevator conversation, "Hey, I really wanted to become a product manager." What would you say?
Well, first I would ask them what they think is attractive about product management. And why they want to become a product manager. I have many friends.
Curiosity right there. I love
this.
Right?
I have friends that have asked me about product that were kind of unhappy in their roles. I have people messaging me on LinkedIn all the time asking how I got into product. And I think assessing out their motivation helps a lot. I think there are people who think that product management is the thing they want to do because they want to make the decisions. And as if product management is just about decision making and getting to focus on cool things. And oftentimes it's not. It's oftentimes being knee deep in data and studying things and kind of applying a methodology versus saying, hey, this hot new thing, I want to build it, right? True product management isn't all the sexy or just decision making. And oftentimes that kind of weeds people out where I'm like, I don't know that you actually want to do product because it's not what you think it is. So after that, it's hard because it depends on what they are currently doing, because often you have to find that pivot and you have to find that entry point into product. So I'll talk to them about where they are. Are they in a scaled organization? Are they in a startup? How they work with product today, if they already work with product, and to find that kind of pivot point where they can use that mix of their gumption, their skills, their knowledge to find that right entry path. Because it's often about those pivot and inflection points. If you're not in product already, you can keep applying for product jobs in vain if you're not being strategic about. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
one of the last things that I'm really curious about is where you think things are going next with the way that the world is going with AI and machine learning everywhere. And how do you see your role changing with some of these new technologies? Or like, what's your thought on the trends and how it'll actually impact industries like yours?
It's a good question.
I think my first thought is AI is here to stay. From building products powered by AI to helping shape how we work and how we build things. And it's something that we all have to lean into, right? I think when I look at the power of like just good old ChatGPT Enterprise and the ability to help write a product requirements document and give you 50% of it so fast, and understanding the context of your company, if you have an enterprise license with them, that's game changing, right? I think that the role of a product manager will evolve a bit. I think that in some ways, I think it's maybe there are parallels to what it was like being a product manager at a startup, wearing many zero to one start wearing many hats, having to do a little bit of design, a little bit of data, hands-on, with a lot of plug and play kind of frameworks. I think that wearing many hats mentality is also going to start pushing through to product managers at companies of all sizes, where you're going to be more of a hands-on builder, where we'll need the relationship with software engineering will change. Software engineering will also evolve. Design will also evolve, right? It's now possible when you look at Figma Make and a lot of these tools that are evolving, for a product person to take care of a lot of the design. And to take care of a lot of the data, for engineers to be able to spit out decently usable code quickly, right? Which means we'll be able to build faster, maybe not with less people, but with people in different roles, or with people whose roles have evolved a bit to be more everybody's a builder. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Like ultimately some of the busy work gets taken off of people's plate, and there is more room to do the fun stuff.
Exactly.
Ultimately. Yeah. Well, unless, Adam, you have anything else, I think
this was fascinating, Patrick. Thank you
was.
so much.
I loved being able to catch up this way, and appreciate you sharing all of these insights and really digging into kind of what makes a great product manager and how to get started in a career, if that's the right thing, and some of the lessons for how you can have a long and an inspiring one at that.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. It's been such a pleasure. I love taking time out to really talk about these things. It's actually, when I'm able to chat about these topics, it really it's a big injection into my energy on any given day. So
it's infectious.
And practicing what you preach of saying, take that time out for the creativity or whatever it may be. So loving all of those examples of the coming to light and what you're describing as well. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks again, Patrick.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much for listening. If you like the show, please leave a review wherever you listen to this and share with someone trying to grow their career or their business. Until next time, keep growing.